So we're going to get started, just so we have as much time as possible for Bridget's talk. Welcome to the Curry School of Education and the Curry School Research Lectureship Series. I want to extend a particular welcome to the alumni and educators around Virginia and more broadly who are joining us remotely. We're glad you're here with us. And I'm Ben Kassman. I'm Assistant Professor in the Education Policy Group. I should also add that this lectureship series is sponsored by the Virginia Education Sciences Training Pre-Doctoral Fellowship Program, which is supported by the Institute for Education Sciences. So we're grateful for that support. What I'm particularly excited to do is to welcome Bridget Terry Long, who is giving today's talk. Bridget is the Academic Dean and the Xander Professor of Education and Economics at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. She's also the chair of the presidentially appointed National Board of Education Sciences, which is an advisory panel for IES. Bridget has authored many nationally recognized and really groundbreaking studies on a range of policy-relevant topics, from financial aid simplification to college remediation to college savings. On a more personal note, Bridget was my advisor at Harvard and really the most important mentor of my professional life. She was the North Star throughout my doctoral program, providing guidance on everything from courses to take, how to more effectively train my papers, and then, of course, what research and professional opportunities to pursue. And Bridget, I know there are a lot of doctoral students in the room, I couldn't have asked for a more generous advisor. Bridget gave tremendously of her time, her resources, giving me access to data, even giving me access to some of her own grant funds to support my experimental work. So it's really an honor and a pleasure for me to introduce Bridget. I'm very conscious and grateful for the fact that whatever career accomplishments I have now into the future are going to build entirely on the foundation of generosity and mentorship that Bridget provided. So it's really thrilling for me to be able to introduce her. Bridget's going to talk for about an hour, after which we'll have 15 to 20 minutes for questions. If you have questions beyond that, please do email Bridget. We do have to help her move along to meetings. I have a particularly selfish request that Bridget and I are supposed to have lunch at 1. So I want to have as much time as possible as I can with her. Enough for me. Please welcome Bridget Terry Long.
Thank you so much, Ben, for that introduction. It's wonderful to be here, and I have to say you all are very lucky to have Ben. He is absolutely fantastic, as I'm sure you're just starting to learn, and thank you everyone who's joining us during this streaming. It's wonderful to be here to take a moment to actually look at some big questions with a number of my projects. And so you see the title here, Nudging Students to College Access and Success. I've been doing a lot of work in this area about what's the role of information or other interventions, things we could do to try to improve student outcomes. And so today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a number of different projects and try to take a big picture view and, well, what do we know about the role of information? I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir, but it's always important to first start off with some basic trend information of what we know is going on with educational opportunity. So this is looking at the enrollment rate of high school graduates into college, the October following graduation, from 1975 to 2010. What you can see over time is, in general, more people are going to college now than were going before, but the blue, the lower line, is the bottom 20%, the green line is the top 20%, and then you have the middle 60%. You can see there are gaps by income, and they've been fairly persistent over time, even after the creation of loans and Pell Grants and all kinds of college access programs and so forth. Very persistent gaps there. So what's the problem? Well, we have problems not only in access, but also choice, completion, all different kinds of indicators, placement into remedial or developmental courses, and so on. And we know that affordability and academic preparation are two major barriers. In fact, a lot of my work started out looking at financial aid programs, thinking that money was the problem. And then looking a lot at academic preparation, looking at post-secondary remediation and the fact that many students aren't doing college-level courses when they get into school. And while those are two major barriers, what's actually common between both of them is just complex information. I put it here, complex processes need to process complicated information, and you have to do the right things at the right time in the right order. You need to take the right courses, you need to take Algebra 2, you need to make sure you take the SAT, you need to do all these academic things. You also need to do all these financial things. Hopefully your family's saving for college. You need to fill out the FAFSA. You can even early on figure out what your eligibility is if you can make it through a complex process. You have to turn the forms in at a certain time. You have institutional forms, all these other things to get you from point A to a Pell Grant or any of these other kind of financial aid programs. So while both of these barriers, both academic preparation and affordability are important, information is behind both of these. And the consequences of making poor decisions regarding higher education are huge. First of all, there's a college wage premium, and it's less so people will debate what's the return to a college degree, realizing it is very robust. All you have to do is say, well, what's the return to not having a college degree? What can you do with your life then? But it's very expensive, and we see increasing numbers of students come out with high debt. And we also worry about students making poor choices by going to schools that have low graduation rates, high loan default rates, meaning they're not getting jobs, they can't afford to pay back their loans. So the consequences of making poor decisions seem to be huge. And so lots of people have been thinking, well, maybe if we can empower consumers to make better decisions by giving them better information, then we would improve outcomes. And this obviously has been a big focus of recent policy, and these questions, well, maybe information is the cure to a number of the problems that we're seeing. And it's appealing for a number of reasons. One, it's a lot cheaper to say, let's just give people information and create a new Pell Grant, even though if we did have better information and more people got the Pell Grant, sure, that would cost us more money. But it's a very different kind of proposition to say, let's just focus on information rather than a new program, and we might actually increase the effectiveness of our current programs if we could do that. It might also be easy to replicate at scale. So a number of us do work, or we've worked with different college access programs or in schools professionally, and we see on a small scale, in a particular school with a particular population, you might be able to get a really good effect. But when you try to replicate that for the nation, things tend to fall apart. Information might be something that we can actually replicate at scale fairly easily. If we take Ben's work with text messaging over the summer and how cheap it was to do that, you can easily imagine doing that on a much larger scale without losing the same kind of fidelity and quality of the intervention. The public also repeatedly says they want more information. Parents say they want more information. Students of all incomes, races, regions of the country say they want more information to be able to make better choices academically and financially. And actually information has worked in other settings. So you have in school choice plans, for example, one-page report cards showing which schools have certain graduation rates or test scores or proficiency, actually influencing parent choice on where they try to send their students. So there's lots of reasons why people think, maybe information is a potential solution to these problems that we're seeing in higher education. But unfortunately what we have doesn't seem to really work well. There's little awareness of the programs that are out there. There's a lot of bad information, misperceptions among parents and students. The information that's posted often is just completely overwhelming and treats it as if every fact is equally important. So take, for example, in fact, the Department of Education realized that information was a problem, so it created the College Navigator, which if you go on there and you pick a school, it'll give you 300 pieces of information and treats as if all those 300 pieces of information are equally important, when really what we might really want to know is something like tuition and financial aid and loan default rates and can I get a job, those kinds of things. So we've had the big push of more and more information, but not necessarily better information. There is still little information on student outcomes, and there's been a big push to have the government do more to try to get job placement, income and wages, loan default, kind of to pick up on that. Let's not even go into student learning. That's a whole nother assessment part of, are students actually learning, where a lot of work needs to be done. And we also still have this model where we create this information, we put it on the website, and then we say, well, if we build it, they'll come to us and figure it all out, rather than pushing it out to students where they live, where they work, where they're having their conversations. So you can find 1,000,001 really great websites out there that nobody knows actually exist. So information might be a solution, but the way things are working right now maybe isn't the best. And certainly we've seen a lot of recent policy initiatives. The net price calculators which are trying to improve consumer information. Now there's this requirement if you go to any school, you should be able to put in some basic information and find out how much this is going to cost you. This happens to be what Harvard looked like. This is UMass Amherst. Notice it looks very different. Also notice on some websites it's right up there up front. On other websites you have to click through 8 different things to find out where it is. And the research actually suggests only 25% of students were using these net price calculators, and then they were only using it for one school. So it wasn't exactly helping comparisons across schools. But this is, one effort. Another effort, know before you go, the kind of college report cards that's trying to prioritize the information, give you clear information about what it's going to cost, what your loan and work study options might be. After graduation, what would you owe? What's the likelihood that you might graduate? Again, trying to really prioritize information. And so you're seeing more of these kinds of tools, but we're really only in the infancy stages of seeing if they're actually going to impact anything. And again, it's still much more of a if we build it, you've got to come to our website. You still need to be aware that it exists in order for it to be able to help you. And then there are also more in the nonprofit side of things. So knowhowtogo.com, all this information about things you need to do. Push yourself, read, put your hands on some cash, find out about financial aid. Again, lots of information initiatives out there. Questionable whether or not they're actually working. But let's go back for a moment to the theory. Why do we think they might work? And let's start to try to disentangle throwing a bunch of information at people is not going to work. So when might it actually work and when might it not? So as an economist, going back to the theory, first, how do we think that information fits into student decision making? First of all, realizing as economists, most of our basic models say, assuming perfect information, blah, 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 blah. Clearly, perfect information does not exist. And we even know as economists, we start with something simple and then we start to complicate it. But of course, there's lots of data out there. Most low-income families overestimate the cost of college by a factor of 3, which of course, even if they're completely rational, if they overinflate the cost, many of them are going to decide it's not worthwhile to go to college. But also realize this cost-benefit calculation that we're asking people to do is really, really complicated. There's a lot of uncertainty. We're trying to tell you what are you going to make when you get out of here. And even if you were able to say, well, I have a 30% chance of making $60,000, a 30% chance of making $40,000, you'd have to do all these weighted kind of calculations and so forth. Really long time horizons. It's not a one-size-fits-all. It's all individualized and personalized and so forth. So we can put this all in a model, but it gets very complicated really fast. So I love this quote from Nudge. If you look at economics textbooks, you learn that you have to think like Albert Einstein, stored as much memory as IBM's Big Blue, exercise the willpower of Gandhi. This is not really how we work and interact. Which has led to the growth of behavioral economics, which has definitely influenced a lot of my research, and I know others. Pure cognitive overload. Trying to do these calculations is next to impossible, and you have to figure out which factors are important. And from these literatures, which really started by looking at white-collar professionals making 401k decisions or healthcare insurance decisions, they found just how complicated these decisions were, and highly educated people weren't able to make them. Now let's look at education when we're talking about low-income, first-generation 17-year-olds in schools with guidance counselors, that are 1,000 students to one, whose parents haven't been to school. It just brings even more complexity. So you can imagine just trying to sort through these decisions is even more difficult. Bounded willpower, lots of things about trading, current pain for some uncertain future gain that you're not quite sure what that looks like. Hassle matters a great deal. And it's choice complexity. There are all these different trade-offs along all these different dimensions, from cost to type of major to where the school is to if you feel like you're going to be included. So lots of different reasons why it's not just a simple model, but that brings us to this overarching question. What can information do for us? When is it enough and when is it not? When do we need not only information but also incentives and perhaps even, assistance, perhaps even incentives? And I gave that theory before to say, the specifics here really matter. This is not just more information is good information, but it may be the fact that for certain kinds of decisions, information matters, and certain kinds of decisions, you need much more assistance, incentives, repeated interactions, and so forth. So some ways we might need to think more deeply about this. So the format of the information matters. How should it be delivered? Should it be delivered face-to-face? Should it be delivered on a website? Should it be delivered a text message, a phone call? By whom? Should it be a peer? Should it be a teacher, guidance counselor, parent, government official, state official? There are all these different choices and who could deliver the information. What are they delivering? How are they presenting it? When? And then I've been thinking a lot about this. For what purpose? That we need to start separating out. There are a lot of different tasks. If we're trying to influence expectations, information may actually work with that. Or a simple one-time task that's going to take me less than 2 minutes, then just giving me some information and helping me do that might be fine. But as we get to completing much more complicated tasks, like filling out the FAFSA, which I'll talk about in a second, maybe not. Maybe information, though, could help connect people with assistance, combine it with that. And always with these, keep in mind, who are we trying to nudge? Because sometimes it's the student, sometimes it's the parent, sometimes maybe it's even a college or university. So, and this is a brainstorm of all these different little decisions. Again, keeping in mind, some of these are really complex decisions, some of these are very, very easy. Registering for the SAT is something you can do in one sitting. Filling out the FAFSA, not so much. Some of these you may need much more assistance, and so instead of thinking information is going to solve everything, what I'm suggesting is let's think much more carefully about what information can solve versus what we're going to need a combination of other things, and not expecting information to solve everything, but it may be able to do certain things for us. Okay. So the question for the day, and I'm going to talk a bit from a number of different studies I've done, first looking at the FAFSA and some experiments related to that, then college savings, and then finally parental involvement with this whole process. So for those of you on campus, you have a paper that was published in 2012 looking at the impact of the FAFSA, and I think many of you have read that ahead of time. This is a work that I've done with Eric Xander, who's at Stanford, Phil Oriopoulos, who's at the University of Toronto, and Lisa Sembumatsu, who's at the NBER. Our goal is to test whether or not, test the degree to which the FAFSA, the Federal Financial Aid Form, is a barrier to college access and so forth. So this was going back to 2006, and we were brainstorming what are ways that we can help students. We keep hearing about this barrier with the FAFSA form, and everyone is saying information is a problem. Let's really test and see how much of a problem it is, and if we can streamline this process. So what we did is we did a partnership with H&R Block. At the time, they had a group that was focused on low and moderate income families, and they had an open call for proposals of different kinds of projects to help these groups. A number of different people applied. Brookings was organizing this, so there was a food stamps group, there was an EITC group, there was a healthcare group, and then there was our group where we said, wait a second, most of the FAFSA is just tax return information. Let's put these two together. So we made a proposal and started working with them in 2006. Families would come in, complete their tax returns as normal. Then if they made less than $40,000 and they had someone in their family between the ages of 15 to 30, 2 pieces of information you could just get from the tax form. We invited them, do you want to learn more about higher education? You say yes, and fill out a background survey, and then we randomize them into different groups. Meanwhile, all the stuff is happening behind the scenes. We just developed a software with H&R Block that took all this information off the tax forms and then just prompted the tax professional, ask this question. Really, really simple in terms of the interface. If you're randomly assigned to the FAFSA treatment group, behind the scenes, it took the information from the tax form and pre-populated the FAFSA, which was a half to 2/3 of the form. We then took the remaining questions, basically rejiggered them around to make them as streamlined as possible, because if you look back at the FAFSA around 2006, 2007, 2008, you had it jumped around the questions all over the place, and we could, instead of being repetitive, just put a clear protocol together to collect the remaining information. We took the information we already had from the tax return, could already figure out a pretty good estimate of your Pell eligibility, and then we were doing this in Ohio and North Carolina, so we could also figure out state aid eligibility just based on that information, and put together on a clear sheet, this is how much you're eligible to receive, as well as trying to combat the fact that people always overinflate the cost of tuition. gave them, here are 4 institutions that students in your area oftentimes go to. Here's what their actual prices are. And then we'll even do the math for you. We'll subtract the financial aid and say, here's what your net price is, all on one sheet. And then if the family wanted us to, we could automatically submit the FAFSA to the Department of Education. We had a deal to do that. So in one sitting, on average, it was 8 minutes from, are you interested in higher education, fill out the consent form because this is a research project, ask some background data, get the entire FAFSA done, and then submit it. Whereas for most families, the Department of Ed said it would take you an hour to fill out the FAFSA. Most families, it took more in the range of 6 to 8 hours. Again, we're doing in less than 8 minutes. And this, I think I might have taken it out, the letter. So the design, again, was to combat the lack of information, combat the lack of awareness about the FAFSA, and this is how you get financial aid, the missed deadlines, little known fact that you need to get your FAFSA done sooner, and if you want to get campus-based aid programs, a lot of the state financial aid programs have earlier deadlines like March 1st or April 1st, and then the late information, I'll come back to this in a moment, where we were telling the high school sophomores and juniors what their aid eligibility was ahead of time. And then this gives you some sense of a mock-up of what the letter looked like. Replace some of the text so it's a little bit easier to see it. Right up front at the top, we said you were eligible for $4,000. Here are a set of schools. This is someone who had been from the Cleveland area. This is what their tuition is. There's your aid. If you're full-time, going on and on again, trying to be really clear to give them some information. We had much more user-friendly sheets originally, and then just with the software program and fitting this onto everyone else, this was what ended up being a compromise. Still a lot better than what they would normally receive. And then we also gave them some information about government student loans to help them understand, for those who choose to do it, these are kind of the terms, they are subsidized, this is what the interest rate is, that kind of thing.
Richard, do you mind backing up just like, so this is something that I think we've discussed, you and I discussed so many times, but how much of this do you think is capitalizing on the power of defaults? In the sense that families were already coming to these places to do their taxes, and so you were essentially taking advantage of that default to add 8 minutes to their time.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I would frame it as capturing a default. What I would definitely, a major lesson from this is grabbing people where they are, and taking this out to them where they live and they work, rather than expecting them to come into an office, which you'll see in a moment. Some other experiments have done where you're just doing everything you can to get people in the office, and once they're there, they realize there's a benefit to this. Whereas this was pushing it out and thinking much more strategically about where do people live and work, where do they already have the information, so the barrier for them to get this additional form done is next to nothing.
Well, no, that's I guess what I mean, that there's a status quo, right? That people are going to do their taxes to H&R Block anyways, and we can think about lots of status quos in people's lives that if we were able to kind of capitalize on, rather than getting people to change what their status quo behavior is.
Right, I mean, so I still think about this a little bit differently, because this was an option. You didn't have to do this, and some people said they didn't want to do it. We gave them a $20 Target gift card for their time, and there were a number of people who said, I'm really glad I sat down and did this. I only stayed for the $20 gift card, but now I realize how beneficial this is. So this wasn't so much a default. If we were going to truly go to a default, we would calculate everybody's FAFSA with the tax, with Treasury and Department of Ed, and a family would never even have to fill out all this information. They would just get sent the letter, this is what your eligibility is. And so these are the debates right now in Washington about using prior year data, because then it just becomes this back of the office processing, and the family never, that's a default. The default would be everyone's financial aid form is already done, rather than you having to take any action or even say yes. Simplification, early information, did they impact these different outcomes? We were using data from the National Student Clearinghouse at the time, about 94% of colleges nationally. We also had information from the Department of Education of who submitted a FAFSA and financial aid receipts. So those are two main data sources. And I'm going to go through this fairly quickly for the doctoral students in the room who are doing more quantitative analysis. You've seen some of these tables in the paper, where those in the treatment group here, you see these statistically significant results, filing a FAFSA, attending college, and receiving a Pell Grant. For multiple data sources, we were able to confirm this. I will come back to this line, though, because there was an information-only group, and you'll notice there are no statistically significant effects there. This is looking at the independent students, those who had gone to college before, and those who had gone to college before. There are people who had gone, but who had been leaving money on the table, basically not filling out the FAFSA, and now increasing their ability to do so. So did something so small have an impact? Many of you know the answer to that. It had a huge impact. So less than 8 minutes, filling out their FAFSAs, 7 percentage point increase for the high school seniors, increase for the older independent students, particularly those that made less than $22,000. That benchmark seems to be important because that's right around the automatic zero line, where if they went through this process, we could say you're eligible for the maximum Pell Grant. Your expected family contribution is 0. You're eligible for the maximum. Other independent students, there was an effect on aid receipt. We're basically helping them get money that they deserve. And then we continue to follow them. And you can see these positive effects, particularly here, enrolling in college 2 consecutive years, total years in college. This is looking after 3 years, these positive effects. Again, dependents were 8 percentage points more likely to be enrolled 2 consecutive years. Independents also more likely to be enrolled. It seemed to speed up initial college enrollment and then keep them there. So one of the other interesting parts of this, we might have been using this intervention to get people over a barrier, and some critics would say, well, that barrier is there for a reason. If you can't fill out the FAFSA, maybe you shouldn't be going to college. This would be very counter, saying, getting them over that barrier, once they got in college, they actually stayed. That the skills necessary to complete the FAFSA don't necessarily seem to be the skills that you need in order to succeed in college, which says something really kind of messed up about our policy, that our aid program is more difficult than actually persisting in school. But when we did this project, actually very, very surprised that such a small thing actually had a huge effect. This wasn't rocket science. It was kind of common sense. If we make a process easier, it'll probably have an effect. But we were the first ones to be able to do it in a really nice randomized controlled trial, and then it had these really huge effects that no matter what we threw at, persisted. Yes?
So if you're decreasing dropouts for comparable students who were filling out the FAFSA before your randomized controlled trial with students who are filling it out now, how do you explain the dropout rate for students that were filling it out by themselves without your randomized control trial? So this is a decrease from that to the randomized.
So this is just comparing 2 groups of people that are ex ante similar. If we helped them, they were much more likely to persist than if we didn't help them. For the ones that we didn't help, we found that they were a lot less likely to fill out the FAFSA all by themselves.
Okay, so do you have any idea why filling out the FAFSA by themselves increases the risk of dropout?
Most of them weren't filling out the FAFSA.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. They weren't filling out the FAFSA. They weren't getting financial aid. In fact, people who, low-income first-generation students who can fill out the FAFSA by themselves, I would expect probably have better outcomes because of some unobservables and so forth. It's such a high barrier. Yeah. There's so few supports that's why I think there was such a huge effect here that getting rid of that barrier made such a big difference. David?
Isn't the website where the FAFSA isn't there a toggle where all you have to do is hit it with the toggle and it will populate the exact data for you?
Right, so
it gets you over 2/3 into the curve chunk.
Yes and no. Okay, so this project was done 2008, 2009. The first set of results went straight to the White House, right around the simplification, and right when Treasury and Department of Ed were agreeing to have this linking between the websites. So now if you go and do the FAFSA, and you go, you can have the Treasury information populated on your financial aid form. That is great and wonderful. It's a step in the right direction. Has it solved all problems? No, because first, people don't realize the FAFSA exists. They still have to get to the website. For low-income families, and I'm talking to a lot of college access programs, in order to use FAFSA on the web, you need to have a high-speed private computer. And I live in Boston. Going to the Boston Public Library and looking at the lines for those computers of people just trying to use them, and that's not really a private space. You'd be putting your social security number and all your tax information. So for a lot of low-income families, FAFSA on the web is not a really viable option for them. And then the pre-population, I've heard varying degrees of what the rejection rates are, meaning it tries to pre-populate, but it doesn't work. I've heard anywhere from 40% of the pre-population's not working to 70%. Depends on who you talk to. So there's a lot of kinks that still need to be worked out of the system. Ultimately, I think it's going to be great for middle-class families, and it will save them information, and that's a good thing, but it's not serving low-income students by and large. Yes?
Bridget, can you talk a little bit about the distribution of income of folks who participated in this relative to the distribution of just low-income folks who might have college eligibility?
Right. I will just briefly, but I want to push on, I'm going to talk about a number of different studies. That was a big question with this. Who goes to H&R Block? And we spent a lot of time trying to figure this out. For this sample, I can say most of them were on public assistance. The average amount on their checking account was about $76. I mean, they're very, very low income. And when you were looking at the college enrollment rates before the control group for these low-income students, the college enrollment rates were, I think, 25%, 28%. So this is a very, very low part of the distribution, and it may be the case that this kind of intervention has huge effects for them that wouldn't be quite as large someplace else. But on the other hand, this is really, really hard to help population because they have so many challenges that they're facing. The fact that at 8 minutes with a form would be enough to get them into school when they have all kinds of other family demands still is somewhat amazing to me. This work continues. We have another grant from the Department of Education to continue it outside of H&R Block. It was never meant to be just a for-profit kind of thing, even though this was free to the participants at H&R Block. So we're community tax offices. We have a pilot in Boston that we'll be doing in conjunction with the Boston Public Schools and directing students. Come to a financial aid night, get your taxes done for free, and you'll also do your financial aid form to see other ways of possibly doing this. So taking it out of H&R Block. But another aspect of this that hasn't gotten quite as much attention because we've been continuing to track to see if there are any effects is there was an information-only part of the experiment. So when we did the randomization, some just got information and they went home. Some we filled out the full FAFSA, gave them the option of submitting it, and then some there was a small group where it was kind of the middle group. We gave them personalized information, basically that sheet of paper that said, this is how much aid you're eligible for based off of what we see in your tax form. Here are the 4 local schools and the net price. Go forth. There are things on the web. There's help at the library. You can go to these places and they will help you fill out your FAFSA to get this $4,000 that is just waiting for you. And then we track it over time to see if that would have an effect. We were looking at 2 people, students who are currently eligible, so the high school seniors and the independent students, as well as a set of high school sophomores and juniors, which we were giving early information, and then would see several years later how this would affect filling out the FAFSA, going to college. At least initially, we were kind of excited about this because for the high school sophomores and juniors, we started hearing, particularly in the Cleveland area, the students running into guidance counselors' offices saying, I'm eligible for $4,000, how do I get this money? And there's always been this question also if early information might impact academic decisions. Now that I think college is possible, I'm more likely to take the math class I need to take or study those kinds of things. So initially, we were very hopeful. And then we tracked and we got the results. So this is looking at those 10th and 11th graders aging up if they had graduated high school on time that following fall, the 12th graders, the independents, and so forth. Basically what you can see, for those of you who don't do a lot of quantitative research, there's no asterisks here, meaning there's no statistically significant effects. Nothing. Nada. Not in FAFSA submission, not in going to college, a whole bunch of nada. I could show you a bunch of tables with nothing. But the punchline being, while information plus assistance seem to have these huge effects, information alone and dangling a carrot of $4,000 was not enough to get people over the hurdle. So alone, it didn't affect FAFSA completion or eventual college enrollment. Now, that's not to say that information couldn't help. We don't want to overstate these results. We wish they had been more positive. You know, it could be, maybe we have to go even earlier. Maybe 10th grade is too late. We should be doing this in 3rd grade. Perhaps we were giving them the wrong information or the kind of the wrong levers. Could still be cost-effective, more cost-effective than other solutions. And maybe it works for certain groups of students, but not all groups of students. So when you look at kind of the overall average, so it's not to say that information doesn't work, but it certainly didn't find nearly the same kind of effects that we saw when you had information plus assistance. Yes?
So could you talk a little bit about the quality of the people who were helping the students fill up the FAFSA form versus a student counselor who was completely different and did not have that kind of information? Would it just be the quality of people? Could that be the case?
Oh, I mean, so we don't know what happened. So someone gets this letter. Do they try to fill it out by themselves? Did they go to their guidance counselor? Did they go to the college access program that's in the library? I mean, we don't know what happened with those interactions. But the test wasn't, you know, what's the quality? The test was, if I tell you, all you have to do is fill out the 6-page form to get $4,000. Like, we thought some people would take that, or they'd find the resources, so they would figure it out, or they'd go to the web because the Department of Ed had tools and had little videos to tell you how to do this all by yourself, and it just wasn't enough. That this was a big enough barrier that you did need assistance. Now, the assistance we did in the FAFSA treatment, these are tax professionals who are used to doing taxes, so they do know complicated forms, but they got, 20 minutes training on the FAFSA. It wasn't like they were experts in the FAFSA, and the way the software was set up, it was, what's your gender? Male, female, hit the button, How many kids do you, it was really, really simple software that basically anyone could do. Side note, Intuit did build this module into TurboTax and piloted it, and it was really successful, and people really loved it, but there was no sustainable cost, they couldn't make money off of it, because you can't make money off of filling out people's FAFSAs, so they couched it. So it's not that you can't make this easy,
right.
It's just that the way the system's currently set up, the information alone didn't do it.
Try to understand the information treatment and how it differs from the information you're getting in the FAFSA treatment. And so, am I right that you're not getting the specificity of information?
No, you aren't. You're getting personalized information.
So you're still getting the same table,
the same letter, yeah.
But you're just not getting the submission piece. So the information piece is very equal.
Exactly. Exactly the same.
You're not getting the 8 minutes.
I'm sorry?
You're not getting the 8 minutes.
Right, I mean, you're getting the 1 minute, here's your letter. Exactly. So, information plus personal assistance in this really complicated task seems to have an effect, but information by itself on a really complicated task didn't really seem to work so much. So let's switch gears and look at another complicated and really important process in college access. That's college savings. Family savings is being acknowledged as a really important part of helping families prepare. We're never going to have enough financial aid to meet families' needs, and so there is different policies to try to encourage families to save for themselves. 529 currently being the big one, where you put the money in the account post-tax, but any of the capital gains that you get off of that money are tax-free. There are really, really huge limits. I think it's something like $300,000, which may tell you this is not really a policy that was geared towards low-income families. But for middle-class, upper-class families could be very, very helpful. Though you do see a number of states, particularly pre-Great Recession, buy into the fact that maybe we should be very, very much encouraging this. So depending on which state you invest in, there might be matching incentives for how much the family puts in. The state will also put in tax deductions. San Francisco is saying for every kindergartner, we're going to open an account and put an amount of money and then have kind of compounding interest to kind of help families with this. So college savings is another place where we might try to encourage families to improve college access, but we know families aren't saving. In my own state in Massachusetts, they did some studies looking at the Massachusetts 529, and I think they found only 3% of the accounts were held by low-income families who made less than $40,000. And there are a lot of different theories, and these theories look very similar to the same problems and concerns we just saw with the FAFSA. Low levels of awareness, people not really understanding what the actual costs are, not really understanding what saving options exist and how they might be beneficial. Misperceptions about how savings might affect financial aid. So the myth that if I'm a low-income student and I save $1, it's going to reduce my financial aid package by $1, which is very, very far from the truth. The marginal tax, even for most students, doesn't matter at all. And for the few students it does, it may be for every $1 I save, I lose 10 cents in financial aid, that kind of thing. Plans are very, very complex. Families also tend to procrastinate when the behavioral economics literature tells us when you have something really complex in front of you, you'll just say, well, I'll just do it tomorrow. And we do this in everything in our lives. I have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, and I would hate to tell you how long it took for me to open a 529 account. Actually, it's been within the last 6 months. So we do tend to procrastinate. And these forms, while FAFSA is regulated by Congress, these forms are regulated by the financial industry, and if you've ever looked at them, they have very, very small print about it, and all these financial disclosures. It's very similar to if you were going to buy a stock. And there's nothing user-friendly about these forms at all. It may also be that, it's just not the right policy to try to push for a low or moderate income family. And this has been a big question for the Department of Ed. How much weight should they really put on these? On the other hand, a family saving $15 a month over the course of 4 years can save about $1,500 to $2,000 depending on how they invest it, which would more than cover cost of books. I mean, it would make a dent, particularly for students at community colleges and so forth. So this question and approaching this work is maybe families just don't want to use these, or they really don't understand what the benefits of them. Certainly complexity and lack of information might be preventing some families from engaging in this process. So work with Eric Becker that is currently ongoing. We approach it saying, okay, these are underutilized. Little is known about the best way to design interventions to try to get over these complexity hurdles. So 3 possibilities. Let's increase awareness about the savings options, make sure families know that they exist. Let's simplify the enrollment process. And then third, maybe we need additional incentives to encourage people to get involved. So similar to some of our FAFSA work. And so control group number 1. So the basic setup is we have targeted the parents of students who are in grades 7 to 10. The original proposal to the Department of Education said we wanted to do both 8th graders and kindergartners. They weren't willing for us to wait for the kindergartners to age all the way up to see if there were effects. So the compromise is we now do grades 7 to 10. We invite them to come to these workshops about how to prepare for college, both academically and financially. So we talk a bit about, take challenging courses. You should take the SAT at some point. GPA matters, you should visit colleges at some point, and there's also this financial part, start thinking about your finances, putting away a little bit of money. The control group just gets this informational workshop, and we passed the question, is information alone set up to help families, though we kind of suspected that it wasn't going to have an effect, and you'll see that it didn't. The control group, this information alone is not enough to set them up in these 529 accounts. Treatment group 1 gets basically the same information, but we also say we will sit down with you and help you fill out the form. And we have these nice little guides that go step 1, step 2, step 3. Put your name here, your address here. This is in 10 steps, actually it's more 8 steps. This is how you complete the application, and we will sit down with you and fill it out for yourself. Now, when you open these accounts, you have to have some minimum balance. I think in Ohio it's $25. In Massachusetts it's $50. So we're not giving you that, but we'll give you all the assistance in the world to get over the application at that workshop. And then you can take it home and you can decide whether or not you really want to open this account, or you can give us a check on the spot and we will open it for you. But we're just giving information plus assistance. And then the third group, you get the information, you get the assistance, plus we'll give you the $50 to open the account. So we're giving you a little bit of incentive to sit there, fill out the form, and then once you open the account, you'll be in the system, and Fidelity, who manages the accounts in Massachusetts, now knows that you're in the system and starts sending you monthly statements, and you can interact with them if you want to continue saving. Or if you want, you can just take the money and run. You can take our $50 and close the account. You can do whatever you want, but now it's on you. We're just going to get you over that initial hurdle. Surprisingly, no one has closed their accounts. No one's closed their accounts. So yeah, control group, simplifying the process plus assistance, and then providing the initial funds.
Bridget, was hosting these workshops, or inviting to these workshops part of your original design, or something that you wound up having to do? It seems like that introduces
Oh, yeah.
some of the same informational behavioral barriers.
Yep, and so I have experiment within an experiment that I'll show you in just a second too.
Sure.
Originally, we had chosen kindergartners and 8th graders because it's a time when parents have to come to the school to register their students when they're just starting high school. There's a bunch of orientations when they're just starting kindergarten, and that's what we were hoping to capture. Very early on, though, we realized it's really hard to work with schools in that way. Those orientations are very busy. We can get these down to 30 to 45 minutes, but we can't get them down to 15 minutes in a responsible way that would be, for human subjects, concerns, and so forth, because we are talking about people's money and research and private information, that kind of thing. So we had to try a lot of different things, from trying to have events with the schools that were separate events, trying to have partnered events. And eventually, actually, what we ended up doing last spring is we had, by then, had such good relationships with the Boston Public Schools, we got the addresses of all the 7th to 10th grade parents, and then looked at the zip codes. Boston has this crazy choice and no parking. So it's really hard to have events at schools, and so what we did is we took the zip codes of all the parents and figured out the Mattapan Library, Roxbury Community College, and we started having the events there, and we got this huge surge of parents. But I will come back to how do you even get parents to come to those workshops? I feel like this project started about simplification, assistance, and incentives, and became this whole project on parental involvement. Yes?
Was this intent to treat, or was it like, did everyone who was in all those groups actually get they actually go to the workshop, or was it just the ones that you invited?
So the sample is based on anyone who showed up for a workshop. Now, they didn't necessarily stay for the entire workshop, and even if we offered them help, they could leave as soon as they wanted. But yes, this is based on a sample of people who would show up to do this workshop. Yes?
Do you have any information about how the people who showed up for your workshop are similar or different to the whole population of Boston?
This is definitely ongoing work. This is 828 families as of the beginning of November. We are continuing to collect sample, and so we're going to push on that. Let me show you the characteristics that we do know, and we're going to be able to do more comparisons as we go along to get a sense, at least based on observables, do they look like other Boston Public School families or not? I mean, obviously they're going to be a bit more motivated, for sure. But let's see. So students, if the percentages don't add to 100, it means that the information was missing or unknown in some way. The breakdown by the different grades that we had at the time of the workshop, the maximum carrots education, kind of this bimodal distribution. Part of this is, when we went to Boston Latin, which is a magnet school in Boston, we had 125 parents show up. When you go to the charter schools and other ones, it's taken us a lot longer to build up that sample. And you can see predominantly African American in terms of the parents who are coming. Okay, my animation didn't quite work. Huge spread in terms of income level. So we pitch this project as being both low and moderate income. Going to a Boston model, it's a predominantly moderate to low income district, but with the magnet schools and so forth, you do get a few high income. Only 46% own their home. Awareness, about half knew that there was something called the FAFSA or the Pell Grant. Only about a third knew of something called a 529 account, even though these have been around, I think, since 1997. And are you already saving? So these are the parents of 7th to 10th graders. Or have you already started saving for your child to go to college? About 30%. 10% just within the last 2 years. The method of saving, only 12.7 were in the 529s. Again, this is the major policy push, trying to really encourage families. That's the way that they should save. Others are, savings accounts or other things. Why are you not saving more? A lot of them just said don't have the disposable income to save more. But then you had a third of them saying we're just not sure of what the options are, or we think, what's the point? I'm not going to be able to save enough in order to make a dent. Another 22% saying it's too complicated, and then the myth about I'm going to lose my financial aid if I actually save for college. So So lots of interesting information that we're starting to get from this group. The really interesting thing, though, very, very preliminary. You guys are the first ones to see these results. The control group, we searched 288. The number that have opened accounts, I should say, I have this match going on with the state agency and with Fidelity in multiple different ways to try to discern anyone who has any kind of college savings accounts. You can see, even after the information, how many in the control group. Treatment group 1, this is where we're providing information, plus we'll sit down with you and fill out the form. 1.6% have actually opened accounts. Treatment group 2, where we give you the $50. About 36% have decided to take up that offer and actually open the account. So it took not just information, not just assistance, but also an incentive. And one quick point with this that I found somewhat interesting. Over a third of the parents who actually decided to open an account, once they were in the system, all by themselves decided to sign up for automatic monthly contributions. You can do as little as $15 a month, and the literature tells us this is the most effective way to save over time. And this, to us, means once you get them over that initial barrier and they're kind of in the system and it's easy to do other things, a third of them are actually deciding to do this all by themselves without any additional information from us. We're just tracking to see what happens with the accounts. Yes?
So I might have missed this, but were you randomizing people once they got to the workshop?
Yes.
So people at the same workshop would be getting different treatments?
Yeah, so we would have, when we set this up, for most of them, people come to the workshop, we randomized, and there were 3 different rooms.
Okay.
The green, the blue, and the red. For a few of the smaller ones that we experimented with over the summer, we had different nights for different groups, but the way that we were randomizing them, a Tuesday, there was always a Tuesday night that had a possibility of each 3 groups, and a Saturday morning. And so we were very careful. And as we go on, as I get more data, I'll do all the checks to make sure that the groups, at least based on observables, look similar.
Was there any sort of pushback from the parents in terms of like, hey, why is that guy getting $50?
We spent a lot of time worrying about contagion. And having a lot of processes in place to kind of to deal with that factor. In the end, the school districts, the principals were convinced in the argument. Everybody's made better off. Some are just made $50 better off, and others are just made better off with a lot more information and resources. So that was enough to sell them on this. And basically, it was a grant where I said, look, I want to spend this money in Boston. I really want to make this work. This is my home. But here's the condition. I have to randomize.
You had said that about 30% of parents are already saving, so are the third of parents who open accounts that are now contributing monthly, is that the same group of people who are already saving, or is that a different group?
These are brand new accounts. We're tracking both brand new accounts as well as we know if you previously had accounts, does your savings behavior change after you go to one of these workshops? Do you start getting more? Do you change your portfolio options? All those other kinds of things. Again, very, very preliminary, so we're tracking all that information. We'll be able to do much more of that analysis. But this is the thing that keeps jumping out at me. Information alone is not going to get 529s open. Information and even sitting with you on a really difficult form, also not. But if you can just get them over that initial hurdle, then it becomes really easy, and they get these monthly reminders. And then it becomes really easy to say, yeah, I'll just do $15 a month. I can do that. And some families are doing a lot more than that. I have some sense that for some families, this is one of those things where you know you need to do it, you've been procrastinating, and then someone gets you over the hurdle and it makes it really easy to do marginal changes. So that's another little piece of information. Again, complex processes, information alone is not going to get us there, and even information plus assistance. So we need to think much more deliberately about what's the decision that we're trying to change, and how much do we need to give in order to get over that hurdle. But as I said to Ben earlier, this became a big game in parental involvement as well, because it's really hard to get parents to go to these workshops. And there's somewhat of a debate in college access programs about how much should you even pay attention to parents. Should you involve them in the process, or should you pretend they don't exist and just focus on the students? I can see why people get frustrated with that, because it does get to be hard. Though there are lots of things that you can do to make these programs more appealing and convenient and helpful to families. What we ended up doing, Melissa Burt is a former doctoral student of mine, Ben knows very well, who's become a person on the project, had this great idea of doing an experiment within an experiment to see if we could get parents to come. So when we got all the addresses, we started doing direct mailings to families to invite them to these workshops. And then we played around with the framing, and we randomized what was the message at the top of the postcard or the letter that we sent them. It could have been positive, saying there's a lot of financial aid, so after you get all this financial aid, your tuition price isn't all that high. Or it could be the negative, the sky is falling, college costs this much, we can help, the $17,000. Or it could have been this neutral. Are you thinking about savings? We can help. So we randomized, we had 14,000 addresses, we randomized what was the top line on there to try to see, it's the way that we frame the information, does that influence who actually responds? And again, this is a very different kind of behavior. We're not trying to get them to fill out the FAFSA, we're not trying to get them to fill out 529, we're just trying to see if they will show up to a workshop. Okay? Different outcome. First of all, you'll notice lots of people don't respond to the postcards. But second of all, negative, and this is whether or not they RSVP'd or attended, and this is whether or not they attended. Much more likely to do so, giving them the sky is falling $17,000 framing than the positive. I actually expected it was going to be the more positive, and if you look at the regression, it's actually largely statistically significant, even with such small rates. So again, the how matters. Okay, and you can imagine if you're doing this over millions of people, this is not a program that's going to affect 100% of families, but I mean, we're talking smaller margins, but I was, it was just a difference of printing different letters. So we'll be doing more of that. I want to end with one other program that I've been working with and helping them to do some analysis. Again, another information push, something called Fuel that's been working in Chelsea and Lynn, just north of Boston. Monthly workshops to inform parents about financial aid and savings. Although the way they get people to go to their workshops is they have savings circles and matching if you come and help you with opening your bank account. So it's kind of information, repeated information, and assistance. And I'll say just briefly, it looks like it's actually having effects. This is some work with another doctoral student of mine. She's been doing the qualitative research, I'm doing with the quantitative. And we do see parents using college knowledge to do college visits. A couple of quotes. I knew I needed to do this stuff, but I didn't know exactly how to do it, and now I do. Or we knew we need to save some money, but we didn't know where to start, and they helped them open a just a bank account, just a checking account. The first one, and that helped them there. So, putting this all together, I think I'm just trying to make a case, and I'm personally at this point where I'm coming to the end of a number of projects, trying to think of the next ones, trying to sort out in this landscape. We think information works some places, but not others. We think assistance might be needed more and not others, and thinking much more strategically about that. And I think it does come down to, what's the behavior that you're trying to affect. I don't know that we'll be able to get over the FAFSA hurdle with information alone unless the underlying system changes completely. It's a very complex process, but there's some other things, some other smaller decisions, registering for the SAT, reminding you to go take the SAT, some of Ben's summer melt work, some smaller tasks that you need to do in order to go to college that might be effective. So food for thought, information alone is not always good enough. Getting over that initial hurdle oftentimes helps families, it looks like, engaged. Complicated process, you're going to need assistance, maybe even incentives. And from our FAFSA work, the two things that Eric kind of pointed, we need to spring it on them, meaning you need to go to them with it, and then you need to ride the wave, meaning you need to go full to completion, get it all done in one sitting, rather than making people log back onto FAFSA on the web multiple times. Every time you do that, you lose people. But even simple tasks, information can have a small effect. So that's where Jim?
As you know, several years ago, Susan and Arcee and friends did this postcard. I take it it was like 4 pieces of information and you had all. That died, I guess?
It's back up. So I was testifying in front of the Senate Health Committee last week, and it came up again that we should do much more early information. And, most of financial aid, 97%, according to Sue and Judy, 97% of financial aid comes down to family size and family income. And so we should be doing more than that rather than having a complicated process. I don't know if it's going to go anywhere politically, but people do keep discussing that. Yes?
I was wondering, in the political science literature where they do these experiments these nudges. There might huge treatment effects from sort of peer pressure, like peer. Have you thought about, I'm thinking about your experiment, sort of trying to take advantage of using that as a treatment condition where you're getting 60% of your people are.
So the question is using peer pressure to try to encourage people to come to workshops. We actually thought about that, but what we were already kind of convinced by that literature that it makes sense that all of the letters had quotes from parents who had participated in previous workshops. At one point we thought we would randomize, some of the letters would have quotes from parents and some wouldn't, but we thought it was already going to work, and so we really needed people to come to workshops, so we didn't randomize that. Yeah, but and you hear that also with FUEL, that the parent support and the parent sharing of information and these savings circles actually is a really important transmission of information. Yes, Jim?
So if you think about trying to scale some of these stuff, and it's probably going to vary by the kind of intervention you're talking about, is some of this scalable back in high school, for example, where high schools could proactively engage in these kinds of activities?
Yeah, so I think with FAFSA, if we can do a lot more of the, so let's say we actually did the calculations behind the scenes, where Treasury and Department of Ed figured out all the income information so families never did it. That would mean schools could fill out FAFSAs. You wouldn't need tax returns, you would just need the kid's name. The kid's name. California, you want a driver's license number. I mean, there's a few states where they ask for a few other pieces of information. But that's one of the reasons why I've been pushing. Do that back of the office calculation, because then the school becomes a place where you can fill out the FAFSA. Right now, you have to have parents to be involved. They have to be present. You have to have 2 signatures. You have to do all this other kind of stuff. With college savings, there actually was a proposal to have a project and do college savings through GEAR programs and have students automatically enrolled into the college savings programs and then go that way. So there's a way you could do it through schools, but you still have to get over the application hurdles. They have to be automatically enrolled. So let's see what happens in San Francisco with the kindergartners, where they're automatically enrolled, and then you can do much more engagement within the school or encouragement within the school, but this first barrier of the application is what holds that up. So for a number of these things, it's that application that holds a lot of these things up. But if we use information we already have elsewhere, then it makes it possible to do not just in schools, but college access programs. Or, the other thing that I've said is if we could get the FAFSA out of the way, then guidance counselors, college access programs could spend a lot more time doing the personalized counseling on choice rather than just getting over a form. And they could just change the way they use their time. Yes?
For your 529 intervention, do you know where those third accounts fall in the distribution?
So that's additional analysis. Yes, I do know. I mean, I don't know right this moment. I have the ability to know in the future. And I also have the ability to know how they're investing. When they sign up for the accounts in our program, according to the IRB, to make sure they're held harmless, they go into a money market account that can't lose money. I'm curious to see how many families actually start switching them to other savings instruments. Like how active, like when you get an account, are you just ignoring it and letting the money build, or are you actively managing it, changing according to your needs, adding automatic monthly contributions, things like that? Yes.
So in the H&R block work, information plus the 8 minutes is a big impact on FAFSA, college entry, college persistence. College savings work, information plus simplified process doesn't lead to savings. And I'm curious how you interpret that. I mean, it's sort of stories that in the FAFSA, you don't actually have to give money in, right? You're just giving a little bit of your time. In this, you're actually having to make what's a small contribution, but nonetheless, do you think it's the...
I think it's the money. I think if it were free to open up an account and you needed no minimum balance, or if it were $10, I think that would have a huge effect. Like I said, Ohio it was 25 and Massachusetts it was 50. I don't think Massachusetts is doing itself much of a service by having 50. I think it's particularly for many of these families, that's just too much of a barrier, or what they're doing is saying, I'll take it home, I'll fill it out later, I'll come back to it, and then our busy lives, we never get back to it. That gets back to this, ride the wave. Like you need to get all the way to completion in one sitting, because anytime you say, I'll take it and I'll come back to it later, it looks like that's not happening. And even, there are a number of families who could easily pay the $50 to open an account, but they're not doing it.
In the first treatment, did they have to have a check on hand? I mean, to the right? If they For the right-of-way point, to fully complete in that sitting, would they have said, were you accepting checks to help them enroll?
Yeah, and out of the 4, there were, I think, 3 of the 4 just happened to have their checkbooks in here. And we had the state agency, NEFA, was on staff to take the application right there and process it. We also gave them postage paid envelopes. When they went home with their application, we gave them an envelope. They just had to stick it in the mail. They didn't have to put the stamp on it. We gave them envelopes. And they still didn't do it. It's just, again, we're all very, very, very busy. And any other little step I have to take, even though it looks so minor, and I think also with college saving that's different than FAFSA, I'll just do it next year. I mean, I said that for 5 years. I'll just do it next year.
So you said you were very worried about contagion. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Like, what kind of checks did you have to guarantee that level was populated?
Yeah, so the question is about contagion and how do we do that? So when the groups were separated, we didn't allow any kind of crossover from the group afterwards. It was much more if a parent came up to us and said, oh, by the way, my friend got this and I didn't. One, you have to have a very talented staff who are very good at talking to parents and saying, I think we were really quite honest because there's not a lot here in the literature to look. We're just trying to understand what works. We have to do this as a really good research project so we can go and make policy better. So we're sorry you didn't get the $50 today, but we hope that this research will make it so that future families, if this really, really does work, will get to have this. And I mean, we're saying that actually quite sincerely now. Research affecting policies might be a big leap. I don't know, we'll see. But we're optimists. But no, a lot of it. And families, it's interesting. I think after Waiting for Superman, this whole idea that in education there were all these lotteries that happened, and maybe it's partly also the Boston context with there's all these lotteries with choice and do you get your walk zone or not. The parents, like we were so prepared for people being mad at us, and it never happened. The parents, they kind of just got it. The schools kind of just got it. And as long as everybody was being made better off, it was okay.
But was there any evidence that maybe your behaviors would have been influenced? Like, oh, my friend,
right.
Got this, so maybe I should be thinking about this too,
So one thing we have been keeping very good track of is who goes to what event. So we'll know, so we can try to do some analysis and later and see if it's certain events or certain kind of cross or something like that. Also if you've done any kind of intervention or workshop, there's the night it's pouring rain. There's the night the Red Sox win. There's all these other things that happen that affect the attendance or just how the event happens. There's the dog barking. There's the construction, or it's the perfect day. And so, trying to look at if it was a site-specific, event-specific, site-specific. Also keeping track of the staff. Is it a staff who gave the presentation? All that kind of stuff we have to keep track of. Now, with the sample size, we're going to end up with a sample size around 1,000, I think, by the end of this year. I don't know how much the subgroup will be able to do, but we've been keeping track of that the entire time. Yes.
Is there any disadvantage to the 529 over a saving account? Is there any reason I have a kid, I have a saving account?
Right.
Can you explain that, or is it completely rational?
No, I mean, we explain it. It's just that with the 529, if you're getting interest or you're even putting in a stock or something like that, and there's gains on that, if you have a regular stock account or interest in a savings account, you get taxed on that. 529, you don't.
But I shouldn't be choosing like a saving account. You shouldn't see anyone choosing a saving account if you have that option.
Well, see, part of the issue with this, I think we started in 2009. The economy was a little funny. No one was really trying to. So this is another thing with this project you can't control. No one trusts banks. When we first started this, we were really worried about credibility, and so we were putting, these are managed by Fidelity. This population does not trust banks in general, and in the middle of the Great Recession is a really bad thing to put a bank on your literature. So there were some things during the pilot phase that we ended up switching, and it was much better to say, no, we're doing this with this college access program in Boston that's highly respected, and the Boston Public Schools, and the Fidelity little icon was very small. Yes.
Can you talk about your choice to use middle school and high school students' parents in this study and not elementary school students?
Right, so this was a time horizon. Ideally, we wanted kindergartners and 8th graders. and they wouldn't let us do the kindergartners because it would take too long. One thing that we will hope to come back to as we continue to track these students is looking at things like transcripts. There's a question again, if you know your parent is saving, does it make you choose different classes or perform differently? And eventually being able to track, do they go to college or do they change where they go to college because of this? And kindergartners would just take too long. Originally, I think we had 8th and 9th graders, and then we brought into 7th and 10th graders just to because we're just trying to get parents to come to workshops and trying to reach out to them.
So do you have any information as far as when do low-income families or families start saving for college? Is it around middle school or grade school, or do they start?
We actually don't know, and so we have that survey question of when they started 2 years ago or how many years ago. And I should say, for a number of these families, they have younger siblings and other great or even older siblings. And we have collected information on those other siblings as well. And I think the sample is going to be we don't have enough third grade siblings to be able to say the effect on a third grader. But we continue to track those kinds of things.
Just a minor point that occurs to me, this rising wage phenomenon, all good salespeople know that, right? The last thing they want is for you to walk out and say, I'll think about it. They'll have everything to get the deal done.
Right, exactly.
So
That's exactly right. We need to definitely learn from other industries and our own processes.
I mean, this is a selling process.
Yeah.
Well, great. Thank you very much, Bridget.